Hello everyone, this quick hit for chapter 2 is dealing with communication and culture, especially on the job. Your textbook talks a lot about diversity, and diversity is important as we're starting to see a large mix when it comes to the workplace. No longer is there just this one culture, there is a giant mix of cultures, and even the United States prides ourselves on being a melting pot. So when we talk about communication and culture, there's really only three things I want to go over. And the first one is that being individualistic culture. An individualistic culture is someone who's part of a culture or a type of culture that places a high value on the individual themselves. They're all about individual values, such as individual power, such as individual freedom, personal achievement, your individual self-expression. So when you think of individual, think of me. That's what it's about. Not me, Mr. Sean, personally, but the collective me, because it's all about you in the individualistic culture. We are responsible for ourselves. And you even see certain political parties who have that as their platform, that you are responsible for you. You have the power to pull yourself up by your bootstraps, and you have the ability to do what you particularly want. So examples in the workplace of individualistic culture would be performance reviews, individual bonuses. If you've if you've worked at a corporation or a company in which one person's bonus is different than another person's bonus, those individual bonuses could come because one has personally achieved a little bit more than the other. Now, there are companies and corporations in which everyone across the board gets XYZ in terms of a bonus, like a $5,000 bonus just to everyone who works at the company. But sometimes some corporations work their bonuses and based on your individual review and based on what you've personally individually done for the company or corporation. Your bonus might be a little bit higher than someone else's because you brought in more clients and therefore brought in more money, or you had more sales compared to your coworker who didn't have near as many, but they still did okay. So which cultures define individualistic cultures? The United States is probably near the top. If you read Hofstede's book on cultures, you'll see that the US of A is clearly in the top tier of individualistic cultures, but other countries include the United Kingdom, Australia, Italy. Let's think about it in terms of you being on the job and you interviewing with someone who's from an individualistic culture. In that interview, they're probably going to ask you more questions that are about what you personally did at the last job that you were at. Not necessarily about team goals, but what did you individually do? If this company or corporation did $1 billion in sales last year, someone who's interviewing you from the individualistic culture would say, but how much did you bring in personally? That shows personal achievement, that shows personal power, the ability to show that you're responsible for yourself. Similarly, individualistic cultures are also low context cultures, meaning they really rely less on meanings and less on abstract and less on nonverbal cues and lie specifically with words. When you talk about a low context culture, they're just going to straight up tell you what it is that they want to tell you. Whereas a high context culture, which we're about to get to, high context cultures kind of utilize meaning, utilize context in and of itself to be more abstract with their wording and their phrasing in certain instances so that they don't just go out and hurt people. And when I say hurt, I'm talking with words and phrases, whereas low context, we're just pretty explicitly stated. We just like to say what we're going to say and go from there. Speaking of, collectivistic cultures tend to place more of a high value on the group itself. They're all about conformity, group harmony. Collectivistic cultures tend to be about loyalty and more about tradition. If we're just specifically talking about certain countries or cultures, these people like to say, the phrase, don't embarrass the group, comes up a lot. If you've done it in a collectivistic cultures work like this. We're doing it like this because that's how we've always done it. And the way we've always done it has shown to keep people in some sort of harmonious faction. So let's just keep doing what we're doing in that particular way. An example in the workplace, group goals, group recognition. So instead of individual recognition, they'll recognize the entire group or the entire team. When you get your big time corporate jobs in downtown Houston making six figures, you're most likely going to be on a team. And then you'll have separate teams that are then part of the entire organization. In a collectivistic culture, even if you were the one person that brought in the most sales, the most clients, the most money to the business, in a collectivistic culture, they wouldn't single you out and recognize you. They instead would recognize the team that you were on. Why? Because we all are in this together. Which cultures tend to embody the collectivistic culture? That will be Hispanics and Latinos, Asians, and those from Pakistan are more collectivistic in nature. They're more about the group conformity, the group harmony, the group tradition and loyalty. Similarly, collectivistic cultures are high context, meaning they're about relationships, they're about meaning. And your book gives great examples of what people say in collectivistic cultures versus what they would say, trying to say the same thing in an individualistic culture. So I implore you to go back to read those now that you fully understand what a collectivistic culture is all about. And finally, your book mentions ethnocentrism. Ethnocentricity or ethnocentrism, it can be phrased either way. It's just the assumption that your culture is superior to others. In an ethnocentric culture, we look at our culture and say we are the correct ones, and it's other people who are messed up, or it's other cultures that are not correct. But our culture, because we're a part of that particular culture, is right, and it's everyone else who's wrong. We believe our culture is normal. That's what people believe who practice ethnocentricity. And this could go from being very abstract to being very specific and concrete. We typically are ethnocentristic about the state of Texas, especially if you're not from the state of Texas. We're very prideful, very boastful about being from Texas. And we look as Texans, especially if you're a native Texan, you look at other states as that state's kind of messed up, or that's not how we do it in Texas. Our barbecue is better than North Carolina barbecue, or is better than Kansas City barbecue. Why? Because it's Texas barbecue. Just even that comparison and even saying that statement is a sign of ethnocentrism or ethnocentricity. When you talk about the workplace, though, we have to be careful that we are not engaging in ethnocentricity. Sometimes we may work with others who don't communicate well. And if they don't communicate well, we look at them as that's not a good business person, or they should be fired, or they're not good at their job, all because they may not communicate in the same faction or the same fashion as you. Remember in the last quick hit, we talked about frame of reference, and everyone comes from a different frame of reference. And just because they do come from a different frame of reference doesn't necessarily mean, or let me rephrase that. Just because they do come from a different frame of reference and communicate differently doesn't necessarily mean that they don't know the business or don't know how to do their job. We can't make that assumption. Now, let's not get this twisted. Let's not get this incorrect. You're probably saying, but Mr. Sean, there are people who are bad at communicating, who are bad at doing their job, and I'm here to 100% agree with you. What I am saying, though, is we can't just automatically jump to that conclusion. But finally, it's impossible to escape ethnocentricity. You listening to this are always going to be ethnocentristic about something, and I'm going to be ethnocentristic, me recording this, about some things. I went to UT. I'm a Longhorn. I am very, very positive that we are the best university in the entire world. And yes, I'm ethnocentristic when it comes to the University of Texas. My UT Longhorn culture is superior to any other college across the country. That's what I believe. So it could be something along those lines. It's still practicing ethnocentricity, but it's in a different context, in a different situation. Whereas some people might practice ethnocentricity because you don't follow certain sports teams, or you don't do certain activities, or maybe because you don't live in a certain area of the city, so that means that your area is more superior than other people's area versus where they live. But one thing you should understand, it's impossible to escape ethnocentrism. It's impossible to not be ethnocentristic because there's always something that we believe is superior to others. Your parents believe you're superior to any other child. Well, I hope they would, right? So we always think there's a culture that we're part of or a co-culture that we're part of that's probably better than certain other cultures that are out there in this world. And if we didn't think that that particular culture was better, we probably wouldn't force ourselves to be part of that particular culture. So this was your quick hit for chapter 2, dealing with culture and communication. And I look forward to reading your discussion boards.